My name is Judith Wilson, and I'm 58 years old. I never imagined that at this stage of my life, I would be starting over completely alone. But when I overheard my soon-to-be son-in-law Richard tell my only daughter Samantha that the greatest gift for our wedding would be if your mother disappeared from our family, something inside me broke and then hardened. So I did exactly what he wanted. I disappeared. Little did they know what my disappearance would truly cost them. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and join me as I share how I reclaimed my life after betrayal. Trust me, this journey has more twists than my old neighborhood's back roads. It all started 6 months before that devastating conversation. My daughter Samantha, my beautiful, ambitious girl who had just turned 30, called me one Sunday afternoon, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom," Richard proposed, "we're getting married in October." I was genuinely happy for her. After losing my husband Jack to a sudden heart attack 10 years earlier, I'd dedicated myself entirely to ensuring Samantha had everything she needed. I worked extra hours at the high school where I taught English, postponed my own dreams of traveling, and focused on being both mother and father to her. Seeing her happy was my greatest joy. But I'd had my concerns about Richard Harrison from their first date 3 years earlier. There was something calculated about him, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, how he subtly directed Samantha's choices, the possessive hand always at the small of her back. Still, I kept my reservations to myself. My daughter was an adult, and I'd raised her to make her own decisions. The tension began almost immediately after the engagement. When I offered to help with wedding planning, Richard responded with a tight smile. "That's thoughtful, Judith. But my mother has connections with the best wedding planner in Boston. We've already had our first meeting." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Well, I'd still love to help with whatever you need." Samantha at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Of course, Mom. Maybe you could help with the invitations." As the months progressed, I watched as my input was systematically dismissed or overruled. The venue I suggested, a beautiful botanical garden where Samantha had loved visiting as a child, was deemed too outdoorsy and unpredictable by Richard. The caterer I recommended, a family friend who had known Samantha since she was in pigtails, was rejected because Richard's family only used premium services. Even my suggestion about Samantha wearing my vintage pearl earrings as her something old was shot down when Richard presented her with diamond earrings that cost more than my car. "Mom, Richard thinks the pearls look a bit dated," Samantha explained, apologetically. The pattern became clear. Richard was systematically cutting me out of the wedding planning, and by extension, out of their lives. Our weekly mother-daughter brunches dwindled to brief phone calls that Samantha always seemed to end abruptly. When I invited them for dinner, Richard always had a work commitment or a previous engagement with his family. The first time I met Richard's parents, the Harrisons, at an engagement dinner at their sprawling colonial home in Beacon Hill, I felt immediately out of place. Margaret Harrison, with her perfectly coiffed, silver hair and tennis-toned arms, looked me up and down with thinly veiled disapproval. "Judith teaches high school English," Richard informed his mother, as if apologizing for my pedestrian career. "How rewarding," Margaret replied, the pause speaking volumes. "Though I imagine the salary leaves something to be desired." Throughout the evening, the conversation revolved around the Harrisons' country club memberships, their vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, and the law firm where both Richard and his father were partners. I sat quietly, watching my daughter morph into someone I barely recognized, laughing too loudly at Margaret's jokes, agreeing enthusiastically with William Harrison's political views that I knew contradicted her own. When I called my son James in Seattle that night, I couldn't hold back my tears. "Mom, I've been worried about this too," James admitted. "When Sam visited us last Christmas, Richard called her every hour on the dot. He even made her FaceTime him to meet everyone at our party. It felt controlling. I'm trying not to interfere," I said, wiping my eyes. "But I feel like I'm losing her. Have you tried talking to her directly?" I had, of course. The previous week, I'd invited Samantha for coffee, just the two of us. After 20 minutes of wedding talk, I gently broached the subject. "Sweetheart, are you happy?" "Truly happy." Samantha looked startled. "Of course I am, Mom. Why would you ask that?" "It's just that You seem different lately. And Richard? Her face immediately closed off. Richard what? Hez successful. He adores me. And Hez planning our perfect future. What exactly is your problem with him? I don't have a problem with him. I just want to make sure he's treating you well, that he respects you and your decisions. Unlike how you're respecting my decision to marry him. She snapped. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Samantha gathering her things and saying, Richard said you might try to put doubts in my mind. He said your generation often resents successful men because of your outdated feminist ideas. I sat there, stunned into silence, as my daughter walked away. As the wedding date approached, I was given fewer and fewer responsibilities. When I asked about the bridal shower, Samantha informed me that Margaret had already organized it at her country club. I wasn't even asked to help address invitations. Richard's sister Bethany had taken care of that. The painful realization settled in my chest like a stone. I was being erased from my daughter's life, one wedding detail at a time. The day of the rehearsal dinner arrived, a warm Friday evening in early October. The maple trees were showing their first hints of gold and crimson, Samantha's favorite time of year. I'd spent extra time getting ready, selecting a deep burgundy dress that Jack had always loved, arranging my silver-streaked hair in soft waves, hoping to look my best among the Harrison family's designer wardrobes. The rehearsal was scheduled for 5 p.m. at St. Elizabeth's Church, followed by dinner at the Bristol, an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor. Always punctual, a trait my students had both appreciated and resented, I arrived at the church 30 minutes early. I thought I might help arrange the flowers or simply have a moment of quiet reflection before the whirlwind evening began. The heavy wooden door creaked as I entered the church's side entrance. Soft light filtered through stained glass, casting colorful patterns across the polished pews. I heard voices coming from the small anteroom beside the altar and assumed it was the wedding coordinator or the priest. Moving quietly down the side aisle, I approached the room, my hand raised to knock on the partially open door. That's when I heard Richard's distinctive voice, the one he used when he was being particularly authoritative. I'm just saying, Samantha, tomorrow starts our real life together, and some things need to change. I know, but my mom is trying. Richard, she's been better lately, hasn't she? My hand froze mid-air. They were discussing me. Trying? She questioned our choice of photographer yesterday, and she brought up that ridiculous garden venue again at lunch. She was just reminiscing. She was undermining our decisions. Again, look, I've tolerated her input because she's your mother, but honestly, the constant second-guessing, the passive-aggressive comments about cost, the way she looks at my family like we're some alien species, I should have walked away, should have cleared my throat, made my presence known. Instead, I stood frozen, my heart beginning to pound so loudly I worried they would hear it. Richard, she's alone. Dad's been gone 10 years, and James lives across the country. She's just trying to be involved. Involved? She's trying to control everything. Did you know she called the caterer directly to ask about adding that Caribbean chicken dish your father supposedly loved? I had done that. Jerk chicken had been Jack's favorite, and I thought it would be a small way to honor him at the wedding. She was just trying to include something of Dad in the wedding. It's our wedding, Samantha, not a memorial service for your father. There was a pause, and I heard what sounded like Samantha sniffling. My chest tightened. Look, Richard continued, his voice softer now, cajoling. I'm not trying to be the bad guy here, but we need boundaries. Your mother calls you 3 times a day. She drops by your office unannounced. She has opinions about everything from our honeymoon destination to what china patterns we should register for. She's excited. She's never planned a wedding before I'm her only daughter. And you're my only wife. My future. My family. Honestly, Samantha, his voice dropped lower, and I had to strain to hear. Do you know what the greatest gift for our wedding would be? If your mother would just disappear from our family, at least until she learns her place. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, barely breathing, for my daughter to defend me, to be outraged on my behalf, to tell Richard that I would always have a central place in her life. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, I heard a soft, resigned sigh. I know she can be a lot. I'll talk to her. After the honeymoon, I'll make sure she understands she needs to give us space. That's my girl, Richard said, the smile evident in his voice. And hey, maybe we get lucky and Shell meet some desperate old widower at the wedding and finally get a life of her own. They both laughed, Richard's laugh full and confident, Samantha's quieter, almost uncertain. I backed away from the door, my legs moving of their own accord. Somehow, I made it outside to the church steps before the first sob escaped my throat. I fumbled for my car keys, my vision blurred with tears, and drove home in a state of shock. That evening, I called the restaurant and claimed a sudden migraine. Samantha texted me, sounding concerned, but I reassured her that I just needed to rest before her big day. Richard sent a perfunctory feel-better message that I didn't bother to answer. Through the sleepless night that followed, I replayed the conversation over and over. The greatest gift. If your mother would just disappear. My daughter's failure to defend me. The casual cruelty of Richard's final comment. The laughter. As dawn broke, I made my decision. If disappearing was the greatest gift I could give them, then that's exactly what I would do. Not just from the wedding, but completely. Richard wanted me gone? I would vanish so thoroughly that they'd never find me unless I wanted to be found. And a small, wounded part of me wanted them to know exactly how it felt to have someone you love disappear from your life without warning. By 7 a.m., I was already at my computer, my eyes red-rimmed but focused. The wedding was scheduled for 4 p.m., which gave me 9 hours to execute what I was already thinking of as Operation Disappearance. First, I called my financial advisor, Martin Greenbaum, and left an urgent message. To his credit, Martin called back within 30 minutes, despite it being a Saturday. Judith, is everything all right? You sound upset. Martin, I need to access my funds. All of them. Today. There was a pause. Today? Judith, it's your daughter's wedding day. Shouldn't you be Martin? I cut him off, my voice steadier than I expected. I need to make some immediate changes. Can you help me, or not? We arranged to meet at his office at 9 a.m. In the meantime, I called my oldest friend from college, Barbara Turner, who had retired to Phoenix 3 years earlier. Barb, it's Judith. I need a huge favor. Judy? What's wrong? Isn't Samantha getting married today? That's complicated. I need a place to stay for a while. A long while. And I need absolute discretion. Barbara, bless her loyal heart, asked surprisingly few questions. My guest room is yours for as long as you need it. When are you coming? I'll be on the road by noon. I'll call you when I'm closer. Next, I created a new email address and purchased a prepaid phone. I wrote down Barbara's address and phone number, along with Jameis' contact information, on a small card that I tucked into my wallet. Everything else would stay behind. At 8:45 a.m., I left for Martin's office. By 10:30 a.m., I had liquidated my retirement accounts, accepting the substantial penalties, closed my regular banking accounts, and opened a new one under my maiden name, Judith Carter, at a national bank with branches in Arizona. Martin looked increasingly concerned as we processed the transactions. Judith, this is highly unusual. Are you in some kind of trouble? I managed a thin smile. Not the kind you're thinking. I'm just starting over. What about Samantha? Does she know you're doing this today? Samantha has made her choices. I'm making mine. From Martin's office, I drove to a real estate agency that advertised fast cash for homes. The balding agent, clearly surprised at my urgency, nonetheless made me an offer on my modest colonial that, while well below market value, would provide enough cushion until I found work. We can close in about 3 weeks, he said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. That's fine. I'll be gone today, but I'll return to sign everything when needed. His eyebrows shot up. You're leaving today? But what about your belongings? I'm taking what matters. The rest can be included in the sale or donated. Back home, I packed methodically. Clothes for different seasons, my laptop and important documents, a few cherished photographs, including one of Jack holding newborn Samantha, and another of James and Samantha at his college graduation. My grandmother's pearl necklace, Jack's wedding ring, which I'd kept on a chain since his death. Everything fit into 2 suitcases and a medium-sized box that I placed in the trunk of my 7-year-old Toyota Camry. At 11:45 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a brief note to Samantha. Samantha, I overheard your conversation with Richard at the church yesterday. I'm giving you both what you want, my absence. I'm sorry it came to this. Take care of yourself. Love. Mom. I placed the note on the mantel, propped against the wedding photo of Jack and me. Then, I took one last look around the house, where Eid raised my children, where Jack and I had built our life together, where Eid thought Eid grow old, surrounded by family. Goodbye, I whispered, and walked out the door. As I pulled out of the driveway, my neighbor Dorothy waved cheerfully from her garden. Looking forward to the wedding, she called. I waved back with a forced smile and turned onto Maple Street, heading for the interstate. The first 100 miles were the hardest. I kept checking my phone, expecting frantic calls from Samantha, wondering where I was. None came. I imagined her getting ready with her bridesmaids, Richard's sister Bethany, and his cousins Emma and Grace. Would she miss my absence, as Id helped her into her dress? Would she wonder where I was when it came time for family photos? Or would Richard manage to smooth over my disappearance, telling guests I'd fallen ill, spinning my absence into a blessing? I crossed the New York state line as the digital clock on my dashboard hit a few hours before the wedding. I visualized the church filling with guests, Samantha in her ivory lace gown, Richard waiting at the altar in his custom tuxedo. The greatest gift. If your mother would just disappear. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed my foot on the accelerator. Memories flooded my mind as I drove. Samantha's first steps, taken toward Jack while I recorded on our bulky video camera. Her first day of kindergarten, clutching my hand until the very last moment. Teaching her to drive in an empty parking lot. Both of us laughing hysterically when she accidentally hit the curb. Helping her move into her college dorm, fighting back tears until I was alone in my car. Had I been too involved in her life? Too protective after Jack died? Had I somehow driven her toward a man who would isolate her from me? These questions tormented me across Pennsylvania and into Ohio, where I stopped at a motel for a few hours of restless sleep. By then, the wedding reception would be in full swing. I wondered if anyone had even noticed I wasn't there. The next morning, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Samantha, all from after the ceremony. 1 voicemail. Mom? Where are you? Everyone's asking. Please call me back. I'm worried. I almost broke then, almost called her back to explain, to apologize, to return to the life I knew, however diminished my role would be. Instead, I turned off my phone, got back in my car, and continued west, toward my new life. Phoenix greeted me with a relentless sun and dry heat that made my lungs feel strange after decades of New England humidity. Barbara stood waiting on her Adobe-style porch as I pulled into her driveway, her short gray hair catching the golden afternoon light. "Oh, Judy," she said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. What in the world happened? Inside her air-conditioned home, over a glass of iced tea, I told her everything: the months of isolation, Richard's controlling behavior, the devastating conversation Id overheard, and my impulsive decision to disappear. Barbara listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to outrage to deep concern. "So you just left? On her wedding day?" "It's what they wanted," I said, my voice hollow. "Richard said the greatest gift would be my disappearance." But Samantha didn't defend me, agreed to talk to me about giving them space. The pain felt fresh as I said it aloud. My own daughter laughed when Richard suggested I should find some desperate old widower. Barbara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You can stay here as long as you need to figure things out. No pressure, no timeline." That first week was a blur of sleepless nights and emotionally exhausted days. I checked my email compulsively, finding increasingly frantic messages from Samantha. "Mom, where are you? Please call me. Everyone's worried sick." "Mom, I found your note. What conversation? What did you hear? Please call me back." "Mom, we've contacted the police. They're treating this as a missing person case. Whatever you think you heard, we can talk about it. Just let me know you're safe." James called my prepaid phone on the 3rd day. Id texted him a brief message from the road. "I'm safe. I'll explain later. Don't tell Samantha." "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His voice was a mixture of relief and anger. "Sam is falling apart. The police are involved. Did you really just leave? On her wedding day?" I explained what had happened, my voice breaking several times. There was a long silence before James spoke again. Jesus, Mom. That's. I knew Richard was controlling, but this is another level. You can't tell Samantha where I am. I insisted. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She's my sister. She's devastated. She made her choice, James. She chose Richard. After much debate, we agreed that James could tell Samantha I was safe, but couldn't reveal my location. He would also help me manage the sale of my house remotely. As the weeks passed, I began building the framework of a new life. Barbara helped me find a small one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community called Desert Palms. I visited a salon and had my shoulder-length brown hair cut into a short, practical style, and for the first time in my life, highlighted with blonde streaks. I purchased new glasses with stylish frames instead of my usual conservative ones. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself, which was precisely the point. I applied for a part-time position at a local bookstore called Saguaro Books, using my maiden name and listing Barbara as my reference. The owner, a kind woman named Lillian who was about my age, hired me on the spot. "We need more people who actually read around here," she said with a wink. Working among books provided a quiet comfort. I arranged displays, recommended titles to customers, and slowly began to emerge from my fog of grief and betrayal. In the evenings, I'd sit on my small patio, watching the spectacular desert sunsets and trying to imagine a future different from the one I'd always envisioned. But as December approached, bringing with it the first Christmas I'd ever spend away from my children, the depression hit hard. I called in sick to work for 3 days straight, barely able to get out of bed. I stopped answering Barbara's calls and ignored the weekly email updates from James. On the 4th day, Barbara used her spare key to enter my apartment. "This has gone on long enough," she announced, pulling open my curtains to let in the winter sunlight. "Shower. Get dressed. We're going out." "I can't, Barb. I just can't." She sat on the edge of my bed, her expression softening. "I know it hurts, Judy. Believe me, I understand loss. Barbara's husband had died of cancer 5 years earlier, and her only son lived in Australia. But you can't disappear from your own life, too." "What life?" I asked bitterly. "My daughter doesn't want me. My son's on the other side of the country. My career is over. I'm 60 years old. Starting from nothing. Starting over." Barbara corrected firmly. "Not from nothing. You have your intelligence, your compassion, your stubborn determination, which, frankly, I've always admired and found mildly terrifying." That startled a laugh out of me. "And you have me," she continued. "Now get up. We're going to the botanical garden. They have a winter lights display that will either cheer you up or at least give you something new to be grumpy about." That evening, walking among desert plants transformed by thousands of twinkling lights, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. "I don't know who I am without being Samantha and Jameis' mother," I admitted as we sat on a bench, sipping hot chocolate. "Then, it's time to find out," Barbara replied simply. The next day, I returned to work. I joined a book club at the community center. I started taking walks in the early mornings, before the heat became oppressive, nodding at neighbors until nods became smiles, and eventually, conversations. I was learning how to live a life I'd never wanted or imagined, and on some days, I almost convinced myself I could be content. While I was struggling to build a new life in Arizona, Samantha and Richard had returned from their 2-week honeymoon in Bali to discover the full impact of my disappearance. I learned this later, from James, who had become my reluctant conduit of family information. According to him, Samantha had been concerned but not alarmed when I didn't appear at the wedding, assuming I was making some dramatic point about being excluded from the planning. "She thought you'd be at the house when they got back," James explained during one of our weekly calls. "When she found it empty except for your note, she completely fell apart. The police had been called. Missing person reports filed. My photo circulated, but with no signs of foul play, my financial accounts closed, and my clear intent to leave established by the house sale, the investigation stalled. I was an adult who had chosen to leave. There was no crime to investigate. Richard, James told me, had initially been furious, calling my actions manipulative and attention-seeking. Had told Samantha that I was just trying to make their wedding and honeymoon about me instead of them. But even he got worried when weeks passed with no word. James said. I think it finally hit him that you were really gone. Samantha had moved between anger, confusion, and devastating guilt. After finding my note, Shed pressed Richard about what conversation I might have overheard, but Head claimed ignorance. She started remembering little things. James continued, how Richard always seemed to schedule couple activities when you suggested family ones. How Head rolled his eyes when you called. She's asking questions she should have asked months ago. I closed my eyes, torn between vindication and heartache. It's too late now. Is it, Mom? She's your daughter. She made a mistake. She chose him over me. She laughed when he suggested I should disappear. She was caught between the two people she loves most. She made the wrong choice, but she's paying for it now. I changed the subject, unwilling to let myself hope. By the 2-month mark, life at Desert Palms had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore. I'd made a few casual friends in my complex. Nancy, a retired nurse from Chicago, a spunky 70-year-old who organized the weekly movie nights. None of them knew my real story. To them, I was Judith Carter, a widow from Massachusetts who'd moved to Phoenix for the climate and a fresh start. Meanwhile, according to James, cracks were appearing in Samantha and Richard's perfect marriage. The first holiday season brought tensions to the surface. Richard wanted to spend Christmas with his family at their place in Vermont. James reported. Sam wanted to come see me in Seattle, to be with family after losing you. It turned into their first major fight. Richard had won that battle. They'd spent Christmas skiing with the Harrisons, while James had flown to Phoenix secretly to spend the holiday with me. Our reunion had been emotional, my tall, bearded son folding me in his arms, both of us crying in the arrivals area of Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. You look different, Head said, studying my new hairstyle and clothes. More. I don't know. Free. Somehow. For 3 days, we caught up on each other's lives. I showed him my apartment, introduced him to my new friends, as my son visiting from Seattle, with no mention of missing mothers or estranged sisters, and took him hiking in the beautiful desert landscape I'd come to appreciate. On his last night, over dinner at a local Mexican restaurant, James broached the subject I'd been avoiding. Sam found your wedding photo album last week, the one you made for her when she got engaged. She sat on her kitchen floor crying for hours. I stared down at my untouched enchiladas. Richard must have loved that. That's just it, Mom. He wasn't there. Has been working late a lot lately. James made air quotes around the words. What are you suggesting? Nothing definite. Just that Sam mentioned meeting one of Richard's colleagues at a firm dinner. A woman named Veronica, who seemed surprised when Sam mentioned Richard's late nights at the office. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Not concern for my daughter, I wasn't ready for that yet, but recognition. How many times had Jack worked late during that rough patch in our marriage 20 years ago? How long had it taken me to connect the dots to his young research assistant? Sam will figure it out, I said finally. She's smart. She needs her mom. James replied quietly. I shook my head. She needs to stand on her own first. To see Richard for who he really is, without my influence. When James left the next day, I felt the loss anew not just of my children, but of the future I'd expected. The grandchildren I might never meet, the family holidays never to be celebrated together again. But something else had happened during James' visit. Seeing my new life through his eyes, I'd realized that it wasn't just a holding pattern, a purgatory, until reconciliation. It was becoming truly mine, with its own value and meaning. I wasn't just Samantha and James' mother anymore. I was Judith, friend, colleague, neighbor, survivor, and for the first time since I'd driven away from my old life, I felt the stirrings of genuine hope for the future, whatever form it might take. My first full year in Phoenix passed more quickly than I could have imagined. Desert Palms no longer felt temporary but like home. My apartment now reflected my evolving tastes, Southwestern-inspired throw pillows, local artwork, shelves filled with books I'd bought with my employee discount. Gone were the traditional colonial furnishings I'd kept for decades, out of habit rather than preference. You're nesting, Barbara observed during one of our weekly dinners. It suits you. It expanded my social circle beyond my immediate neighbors. My book club had introduced me to Regina, a retired professor who shared my love of classic literature, and Michelle, a young mother who brought fresh perspectives to our discussions. We'd begun meeting for coffee outside our monthly book meetings, forming friendships that had nothing to do with my past life. At Saguaro Books, Id started a popular reading series for children on Saturday mornings. Sitting cross-legged on a colorful rug, surrounded by eager young faces as I read stories aloud, I found unexpected joy. I'd always loved teaching teenagers, but there was something particularly rewarding about introducing these little ones to the magic of books. "You're a natural," Lillian told me after watching me handle a particularly rambunctious group. "Ever thought about volunteering with the literacy program at the community center?" That suggestion led to my work with adult learners, 2 evenings a week, immigrants improving their English, older adults who'd never had educational opportunities, young people who'd fallen through the cracks of the school system. Teaching again, even informally, filled a void I hadn't fully acknowledged. James called regularly, giving me carefully edited updates about Samantha. I knew he was walking a difficult line between us, and I tried not to press for details that might compromise his relationship with his sister. But in April, 15 months after my disappearance, James flew to Phoenix for another visit. This time, his expression when he stepped off the plane told me he carried news too complicated for our phone calls. "Richard's having an affair," he said bluntly, once we were in my car. Sam found messages on his phone. "It's been going on for at least 6 months. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, a complex mix of emotions washing over me: vindication, anger on Samantha's behalf, and a guilty relief that my instincts about Richard had been right all along. "With Veronica, the colleague," James nodded, "and possibly others before her." Sam's devastated. "But also, I don't know. Mom. It's like she's finally seeing clearly for the first time." Back at my apartment, over takeout Chinese food, James filled in more details. Samantha had confronted Richard, who'd initially denied everything. When presented with evidence, head shifted to blaming Samantha. Her focus on finding me had made him feel neglected. Her constant emotional needs had driven him to seek comfort elsewhere. "He actually said that if she'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have needed another woman," James said, his voice tight with anger. Can you believe that? I could. All too easily. Richard's manipulative patterns were so clear to me now, viewed from a distance. "How did Samantha respond?" I asked. "That's the thing, Mom. Instead of apologizing, instead of trying to fix things like she would have before, she threw him out, told him to stay with Veronica until she decided what she wanted to do." Pride bloomed in my chest. Good for her. She's been asking about you more. Specifically, about what you noticed about Richard that she missed. I set down my fork. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you saw how he isolated her, how he belittled your input, how he always had to control every situation." James hesitated. "I also finally told her what you overheard at the church that day." My heart lurched. "You what?" "She needed to know, Mom. She didn't believe Richard could have said something that cruel. She kept insisting there must have been a misunderstanding. And now she remembers how he acted after you disappeared, how quickly he tried to erase all signs of you from their life. She's starting to put it all together." James reached across the table for my hand. "She wants to contact you." I pulled my hand back reflexively. "I'm not ready." "Mom, no, James. It's not that simple. Yes, Richard is showing his true colors, but that doesn't erase what happened. Samantha made her choice. She chose him, knowing how he treated me. She agreed with him that I needed to give them space. She was manipulated. You know how that works." I did know. And part of me, the mother part that would never truly disappear, ached to reach out to my daughter in her time of pain. But another part, the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, was still raw with betrayal. "I need time," I said finally. "Tell her I'm safe. Tell her I think about her. But I'm not ready for contact yet." 2 days after James left, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line, "Mom, please." My finger hovered over the delete button before curiosity won out. "Mom, James told me what you heard Richard say at the church. I am so sorry." I don't remember laughing. I honestly don't, but I do remember feeling trapped and confused and trying to keep peace. That's no excuse. I should have defended you fiercely. I understand now what you saw in Richard that I couldn't see. The control, the isolation, the way he twisted everything to make me dependent on him and his family. Since you've been gone, it's only gotten worse. Finding out about his affairs was almost a relief. It gave me permission to finally see him clearly. I miss you every day. I have so many questions, so many things to apologize for. If you're willing, please respond to this email, even if it's just to tell me you're okay. I love you, Samantha. I read the email a dozen times, tears streaming down my face. Then I closed my laptop without replying. That night, I called Barbara in tears. Am I a terrible person for not responding immediately? For still feeling hurt and angry even knowing she was manipulated? You're a human person, Barbara replied gently. With valid feelings and boundaries? Take the time you need. I consulted with James and Barbara over the next few days, struggling with what to do. In the end, I composed a careful reply. Samantha, I am safe and well. I've built a new life that brings me satisfaction and even joy on good days. What happened between us can't be erased with a single email, no matter how heartfelt. The wounds are deep and still healing. I'm sorry about Richard's betrayal. No one deserves that kind of treatment, especially not someone with your capacity for loyalty and love. As you navigate this difficult time, listen to your intuition. It will guide you better than any outside advice. I'm not ready for direct contact yet, but perhaps that will change with time. Take care of yourself, Mom. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, a first tentative step toward whatever might come next. 18 months after I'd left Boston, my life in Phoenix had achieved a stability I'd never expected. I'd been promoted to manager at Saguaro Books after Lillian decided to semi-retire. My adult literacy program had expanded to 3 evenings a week. I'd even started dating occasionally, nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with men from my apartment complex or the community center, testing the unfamiliar waters of romance in my 60s. My correspondence with Samantha had remained cautious and infrequent. Every few weeks, we'd exchange brief emails, hers eager and detailed, mine measured and restrained. She told me about her therapy sessions, her realization of how Richard had systematically driven wedges between her and the people who loved her, her growing confidence in her own perceptions. I shared carefully selected glimpses of my new life, my work at the bookstore, the beautiful desert landscape, the friends who had become my support system. I never revealed my location, and to her credit, Samantha never asked. Then came the email that changed everything. Mom, I need your help. Things with Richard have gotten worse since I asked for a divorce. Has frozen our joint accounts. His family is spreading rumors that I'm mentally unstable, that my obsession with finding you triggered some kind of breakdown. Richard's law partners are siding with him, creating a hostile work environment that forced me to quit. Last week, I found financial documents showing Richard has been hiding money for years, moving it through offshore accounts. When I confronted him, he threatened to make sure I end up with nothing. I'm scared, Mom. I don't know who to trust. His family has so much influence in this city. James is trying to help from Seattle, but there's only so much he can do remotely. I understand if you're not ready to see me, but I could really use your guidance. Love, Samantha. My heart raced as I read her words. The familiar protective instinct surged through me, tempered by the memory of betrayal. I printed the email and took it to my weekly dinner with Barbara, seeking her counsel as I had so often over the past year and a half. What would you do if this were any other young woman in trouble? Barbara asked after reading it. One of your literacy students, for instance. It'd help her. Of course, I replied immediately. Then there's your answer. Barbara squeezed my hand. The question isn't whether to help. It's how. That night, I composed a careful response. Samantha, first, document everything. Every threatening comment, every financial document you've found, every interaction with his family members. Date and time, everything. Forward copies to a secure email only you can access. Second, consult with a divorce attorney who has no connections to Richard's firm or social circle. Look for someone with experience handling high-conflict divorces involving financial deception. Third, build your support network. Reconnect with friends from before your relationship with Richard, people he might have isolated you from. You'll need witnesses to your mental stability and character. I'm not ready for in-person contact yet, but I'll help however I can from a distance. Stay strong, Mom. Over the next few weeks, our emails increased in frequency and depth. I found myself dispensing advice gleaned from my own divorce clients during my teaching years, from books on financial abuse, from the hard-won wisdom of my own life experiences. In a strange way, this distant problem-solving relationship felt safer than the emotional reconciliation Samantha clearly wanted. I could be useful without being vulnerable, supportive without fully reopening my heart to the possibility of further hurt. But Samantha was persistent, gently pushing for more with each exchange. Mom, I found a great attorney, just like you suggested. She's already found evidence that Richard was planning this even before we got married. There was a reason he insisted on handling all the finances. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about my intuition. The truth is, I had doubts about Richard almost from the beginning. But I ignored them because he was so good at making me question myself, just like he made me question your concerns. I keep wondering how different things might have been if I'd listened to you. If I'd had the courage to see him clearly before it was too late. Would you consider talking on the phone sometime, just to hear each other's voices? Love. Samantha, I stared at that email for a long time before closing my laptop without replying. That night, I barely slept, torn between longing and fear, between maternal instinct and self-preservation. I was still wrestling with how to respond the next morning when my doorbell rang. Expecting the package of books I'd ordered, I opened the door without checking the peephole. There stood Samantha. She looked both familiar and strange, thinner than I remembered. Her once long hair now cut into a stylish bob, dark circles under her eyes contrasting with the hopeful expression on her face. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. How had she found me? What did she want? Why now? James told me, she said, answering my unasked question. Please don't be angry with him. I begged him for weeks. You shouldn't have come, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I had to see you, to apologize in person, to try to explain. Tears welled in her eyes. Mom, I am so sorry. For 18 months, I'd imagined this moment, sometimes with anger, sometimes with longing, always with a complex mix of emotions I couldn't fully untangle. But now, faced with my daughter's tear-streaked face, only one feeling rose above the others: relief that she was here, alive and whole, standing before me. You'd better come in, I said, stepping aside. The next few hours passed in a blur of tears and confessions. Samantha detailed Richard's methodical campaign to isolate her, his subtle gaslighting, the ways Head played on her insecurities and manipulated her loyalty. He kept telling me you were trying to control me, that you couldn't accept I was an adult with my own life. And I believed him because it was easier than facing the truth that he was the controlling one. I listened silently, nodding occasionally, fighting the urge to interrupt with my own hurt and anger. When you disappeared, she continued. He actually seemed relieved at first. He told everyone you were just being dramatic, that you'd show up again when you wanted attention. When weeks passed and you didn't return, he started suggesting you might have had some kind of breakdown, and you believed that too. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. For a while, she admitted, looking down at her hands. It was easier than accepting that I'd driven my own mother away, that I'd chosen a man who would say such cruel things about you. She looked up, her eyes pleading. Mom, I swear I don't remember laughing when he said that about you disappearing. If I did, it wasn't because I thought it was funny. It was probably that awful nervous laugh I do when I'm uncomfortable. I remembered that laugh, the same one Shed given as a teenager when caught in a lie, as a child when unsure how to respond to adult tension. It doesn't matter now, I said, though of course it did. It always would. It does matter. Everything about how I failed you matters. She reached for my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I let her take it. I've been in therapy for months, trying to understand how I let Richard manipulate me against the person who has always loved me most in the world. We talked until the desert sun began to set, casting long shadows across my living room. I made tea. We ordered pizza. The conversation flowed more easily as the hours passed, moving from the painful past to Samantha's current struggles with her divorce. Richard's furious that I found the offshore accounts. Hez threatening to drag this out for years unless I agree to his terms. She shook her head. But my lawyer thinks we have enough to prove financial fraud. Good, I said firmly. Don't let him intimidate you. For the first time in our conversation, Samantha smiled a genuine smile that reminded me of the daughter I'd raised. I won't. I'm not that person anymore. As night fell, practical matters asserted themselves. You can sleep on the couch, I offered. It pulls out into a bed. Thank you, she said, then hesitated. Mom? Are we going to be okay? I considered the question carefully. I don't know yet. It's a start, she nodded, accepting this tentative peace offering. That's more than I deserve. As I helped her make up the sofa bed, a new text message alert sounded on her phone. She glanced at it and went pale. What is it? I asked. Richard. She held up her phone. Somehow he knows I'm here. He says he's coming to talk some sense into me. A cold dread settled in my stomach. How would he know where you are? I don't know. I didn't tell anyone except James. And he wouldn't. Her eyes widened. My phone. He must have put tracking software on it. Has done it before. The doorbell rang, startling us both. Through the peephole, I saw Richard, his handsome face contorted with anger, his expensive suit looking rumpled, as if head driven straight from Boston without stopping. Judith, he called through the door. I know Samantha's in there. Open up before I call the police. I turned to my daughter, whose face had drained of all color. Do you want to see him? She shook her head emphatically. Then we don't open the door. I moved to the kitchen and picked up my phone. In fact, if he doesn't leave immediately, I'll be the one calling the police. Richard continued pounding on the door. Samantha, come out here right now. You're making a fool of yourself. Drawing on a strength I hadn't needed to access in years, I approached the door again. Richard, this is Judith. Samantha doesn't want to speak with you. Leave now, or I'll report you for harassment. You. His voice turned venomous. This is all your fault. You've poisoned her against me, just like you've been trying to do from the beginning. No, Richard, I replied calmly. You did that all by yourself. I'll ruin you both, he threatened. I have connections, resources. By the time I'm done, Samantha will have nothing, and you'll wish you'd never interfered. In that moment, I felt no fear, only a clear, righteous anger on behalf of my daughter and myself. I opened the door, standing face to face with the man who had tried to destroy my relationship with my child. You've already lost, Richard, I said quietly. Samantha sees you clearly now, and so do I. His eyes narrowed as he took in my transformed appearance, the stylish haircut, the confident posture, the lack of intimidation in my gaze. You think you've won, he sneered. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Actually, it is. Samantha had come to stand beside me, her shoulder touching mine in a gesture of solidarity that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'm done being manipulated and controlled. By tomorrow, my lawyer will have a restraining order against you. Now leave before we call the police. Richard's face flushed with rage. For a moment, I worried he might become physically aggressive. Instead, he straightened his tie, his mask of civility slipping back into place. You'll regret this, he said coolly. Both of you. As he turned to leave, Samantha called after him. No, Richard. The only thing I regret is not listening to my mother from the beginning. We closed and locked the door, standing together in the entryway, both shaking from the confrontation. Then, for the first time in almost 2 years, I pulled my daughter into my arms. I'm proud of you, I whispered into her hair. And as she clung to me, sobbing with relief and lingering fear, I realized that despite everything, despite all the pain and separation, the fundamental truth remained. She was my child, and I would always be her mother. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. It wasn't an erasing of the past or a guarantee for the future. But it was a beginning, fragile and tentative, but real. 2 years after my disappearance, life had taken yet another unexpected turn. Samantha had stayed in Phoenix for a week after our confrontation with Richard, beginning the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. We'd cried together, argued, reminisced, and finally reached a fragile understanding. We both had made mistakes. We both had been manipulated by Richard in different ways, and we both wanted to heal. When she returned to Boston to continue her divorce proceedings, we maintained daily contact, texts, emails, occasional video calls. The distance that had once felt necessary for my survival now seemed like an obstacle to our reconciliation. Still, I wasn't ready to return to New England, to face the whispers and stares, the explanations I would owe to friends and neighbors. Instead, I focused on strengthening my life in Phoenix. I'd been offered a full-time position coordinating adult education programs at the community center, combining my teaching background with my newer literacy work. Barbara and I had started a support group for women rebuilding their lives after difficult relationships, drawing on our own experiences. My circle of friends had expanded to include people of all ages and backgrounds, creating a vibrant community I'd never expected to find. Samantha kept me updated on her divorce battle, which had turned increasingly ugly as Richard deployed every dirty tactic in his considerable arsenal. Head contested the prenuptial agreement on technicalities. Head tried to paint Samantha as mentally unstable due to her obsession with finding her missing mother. Head attempted to hide assets and manipulate financial records. My lawyer says he's getting desperate, Samantha reported during one of our weekly calls. The judge isn't buying his story, especially since we found evidence he's been planning this since before the wedding. That's good news, I said cautiously, having learned not to underestimate Richard's capacity for deception and manipulation. There's more, she continued, her voice brightening. The firm is conducting an internal investigation. Apparently, Richard's been cutting ethical corners professionally as well as personally. 2 other associates have come forward with complaints. I felt a surge of vindication hearing that Richard's carefully constructed facade was finally crumbling. Still, experience had taught me to be wary. Men like Richard rarely accepted defeat gracefully. Be careful, Samantha. He's most dangerous when he's cornered. I know, Mom. I've got a good security system, and James is coming to stay with me for a while. The mention of James warmed my heart. My son had become the bridge between Samantha and me, supporting us both without taking sides. Head visited Phoenix twice more since our reunion, sometimes with his wife Lisa and their 5-year-old twins, my grandchildren who were getting to know me for the first time. During their last visit, James had broached a subject he'd been avoiding. Mom, have you thought about moving back east? Not to Boston necessarily, but somewhere closer? New York, maybe? Or Connecticut? The question had lingered in my mind ever since. My life in Phoenix was good, fulfilling work, meaningful friendships, a community where I belonged. But my family was on the other coast. My grandchildren were growing up knowing me primarily through video calls and occasional visits. I was still contemplating this dilemma one Tuesday afternoon as I returned home from work, distracted by my thoughts. I didn't immediately notice the unfamiliar car parked across from my apartment building, or the figure sitting on my front step. It was Richard. He stood as I approached, his usual polished appearance noticeably disheveled. His hair, normally perfectly styled, looked unwashed. His expensive suit was wrinkled, dark circles shadowed his bloodshot eyes. "Judith," he said, his voice simultaneously hostile and pleading. "We need to talk." I stopped several feet away, my heart racing. "How did you find me? Does it matter? I'm a lawyer. I have resources." His smile held no warmth. "You've been busy, haven't you? New job, new friends, new life, all while systematically destroying mine. You destroyed your own life, Richard." I kept my voice steady, despite my fear. "Now please leave before I call the police." "The police," he scoffed, always the victim's first threat. "But what exactly would you tell them? That your former son-in-law came to have a civilized conversation? There's nothing civilized about stalking me across the country." I pulled out my phone. "You have 30 seconds to return to your car." His facade cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "You've turned everyone against me. Samantha, her friends, even people at the firm. They're talking about an ethics investigation, possible disbarment. Again, those are consequences of your actions, not mine." "It was supposed to be simple," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Marry Samantha, absorb her trust fund, advance at the firm through her family connections. Then you had to interfere, planting doubts, making her question everything. The casual cruelty with which he described using my daughter made my blood boil. You never loved her. I could have made her happy if you'd just stayed out of the way. He took a step toward me. That's all you had to do. Disappear, like I asked. But you couldn't resist coming back to ruin everything. I didn't come back, Richard. You tracked me down. And I never reached out to Samantha, she found me. I stood my ground despite his proximity. Everything falling apart around you is the result of your own actions. He laughed bitterly. You actually believe that, don't you? That you're innocent in all this. The martyred mother who abandoned her daughter on her wedding day, then acted surprised when the marriage failed. The accusation struck a nerve, touching on my own lingering guilt. Had my disappearance ultimately driven Samantha back to me by making her marriage more difficult? Had I, in some twisted way, gotten exactly what I wanted? I left because you told Samantha the greatest gift I could give was to disappear from your family, I said, pushing the doubt aside. I was giving you what you asked for, and making sure Samantha would blame me when she found out why. His eyes narrowed. Very clever, Judith. I underestimated you. You overestimated yourself, I countered. Now leave, or I'm calling not just the police, but Samantha's lawyer. I'm sure she'd be interested to hear about this visit. Given the restraining order. The mention of the restraining order made him flinch. He was already walking a fine line legally. An arrest would destroy what remained of his professional reputation. For a moment, I thought he would leave. Then his expression hardened. Do you know what it's like to lose everything? Your career, your reputation, your future? To watch it all slip away because one person decided to destroy you. I do, actually. I met his gaze steadily. 2 years ago, I lost my family, my home, my entire identity because you decided I was in your way. That was different. You were interfering. I was loving my daughter, something you've never understood because you've never loved anyone but yourself. My words hit their mark. Richard's face contorted with rage. You self-righteous bitch! You think you've won? This isn't over. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm with bruising force. Before I could react, a car door slammed nearby, and a familiar voice called out, Get your hands off my mother. Samantha strode toward us, phone in hand, already dialing. I'm calling the police, Richard. Violating the restraining order. Crossing state lines to harass my mother, you'll be lucky if you don't end up in jail. Richard released me immediately, backing away. Samantha, I didn't. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you tracked down my mother to threaten and intimidate her. Samantha positioned herself between Richard and me, her body language protective. It's exactly what the judge warned you about at the last hearing. Behind her, I saw James emerging from the same car, his expression grim as he approached. You brought your brother too? Planning an ambush? Richard's voice held a tremor of uncertainty now. We came because Mom mentioned she was thinking of moving back east. We wanted to surprise her with some options we'd researched. Samantha's voice was ice cold. Finding you here is just confirmation that we need to take your threats more seriously. Richard looked from Samantha to James, then to me, his desperate bravado crumbling. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the frightened, insecure man beneath the manipulative exterior, someone so afraid of losing control that he'd destroy anything and anyone who threatened his carefully constructed image. This isn't over, he said again. But the threat sounded hollow now. It is over, Richard, Samantha replied calmly. It's been over since the day my mother left. I just couldn't see it until now. As Richard retreated to his car, defeated at least temporarily, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The confrontation had drained me, bringing back memories and emotions I'd thought were safely behind me. But as James and Samantha surrounded me with protective embraces, guiding me into my apartment, I realized something important had shifted. For 2 years, I'd been running from the pain of betrayal, building a new life separate from my old one. Now, somehow, the worlds were colliding painfully, messily, but perhaps necessarily. I'm sorry, Samantha whispered as we sat together in my living room. I had no idea he would come here. I never should have mentioned Arizona during the deposition. It's not your fault, I assured her, though part of me wished she had been more careful. He would have found me eventually. Men like Richard can't stand to lose. We've already called the police, James said, his expression serious. They're sending someone over to take a statement. With the restraining order violation, they might be able to hold him. As we waited for the police, the three of us, mother, daughter, son, sat together on my sofa, our bodies touching in a way that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. Whatever happened with Richard, whatever decisions lay ahead about where I would live and how our family would heal. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt the weight of my disappearance truly beginning to lift. 6 months after Richard's unexpected appearance at my apartment, I stood in the bright, airy living room of my new condominium in Providence, Rhode Island, close enough to Boston for regular visits with Samantha, but far enough away to maintain the independence I'd grown to value. The walls were still mostly bare, moving boxes stacked in corners, but sunlight streamed through large windows overlooking a small park, promising fresh possibilities. "That's the last of them," James announced, setting down a heavy box labeled kitchen. "Though I still think you could have left half of this stuff in Phoenix." "Probably," I agreed, smiling at my son's good-natured complaint. "But after starting over with nothing once, I've grown attached to my belongings." The decision to move back east hadn't been easy. My life in Phoenix had become comfortable, filled with meaningful work and cherished friendships. Barbara had cried when I told her my plans, though Shed ultimately understood. "Your family needs you," Shed said, wiping her eyes. "And you need them." The community center had thrown me a touching going-away party. My adult literacy students had presented me with a handmade book containing their stories and thanks. Lillian had promised to keep my job open just in case Phoenix calls you back. These gestures had confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't running away this time. I was choosing to move towards something rather than away from something. The final catalyst had been Richard's legal troubles. After violating the restraining order by coming to Phoenix, Head faced criminal charges in addition to professional consequences. The law firm had completed their investigation, finding multiple ethical violations. The Bar Association had suspended his license pending further review. Hez facing possible disbarment. Samantha had explained during one of our now regular video calls, and the divorce proceedings are finally moving forward now that the judge has seen his true colors. Watching my daughter navigate these challenges with growing confidence had filled me with pride and a desire to be physically present for this new chapter of her life. Now, unpacking boxes in my new home, I reflected on how much had changed in the 2.5 years since I'd overheard that devastating conversation at the church. The pain hadn't disappeared. I still felt twinges of hurt remembering Samantha's failure to defend me. Still wondered if our relationship would ever fully recover. But those feelings no longer defined me or controlled my decisions. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. "That'll be Sam," James called from the kitchen, where he was unpacking dishes. She texted that she was running late. I opened the door to find my daughter balancing a large plant in one arm and a bakery box in the other. Her hair had grown out again, and she looked healthier than she had in months. Her face relaxed and smiling. "Housewarming gifts," she announced, handing me the box. "Cinnamon rolls from that bakery you loved when you visited in April." "You didn't have to do that," I said, though the gesture touched me. "I wanted to," she replied simply. "Besides, I have news to celebrate." Inside, after the cinnamon rolls had been distributed and coffee poured, Samantha shared her news. The divorce had been finalized, with terms largely favorable to her. Richard's professional disgrace had weakened his position considerably. "The prenup held up," she explained, looking more relieved than triumphant. And once his firm partners saw the financial evidence my lawyer uncovered, they were eager to distance themselves from him. They even helped negotiate a settlement to avoid further publicity. "What will you do now?" I asked, noting how she spoke of Richard without the emotional charge that had colored her voice for months. "Focus on rebuilding my life," she said thoughtfully. "I'm starting a new position at a nonprofit legal aid organization next month, and I've been looking at apartments near Davis Square." The mention of apartment hunting reminded me of the reason for our gathering today, beyond helping me unpack. Once we'd finished our coffee, Samantha drove us to her apartment, where I would be helping her pack for her own move the following weekend. The irony wasn't lost on any of us, mother helping daughter move out of the apartment Shed shared with the man who had driven them apart. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. As we sorted through Samantha's belongings, deciding what to keep, donate, or discard, we fell into a comfortable rhythm that reminded me of preparing for her college move-in years ago. Some wounds had begun to heal, allowing space for new memories to form alongside the painful ones. That evening, the three of us, James, Samantha, and I sat on the floor of Samantha's half-packed living room, eating takeout and talking about the future. We'd been meeting regularly with a family therapist, working through the complex emotions surrounding my disappearance and our estrangement. Dr. Morgan says we're making good progress, Samantha commented, twirling lo mein around her fork. Though she warns that trust takes longer to rebuild than to break. She's right, I agreed. There are still days when I feel guarded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Me too, Samantha admitted. Sometimes I wake up worried you'll have disappeared again. The honesty between us felt both painful and necessary. We were learning to acknowledge our fears and resentments without allowing them to control our relationship. I'm not going anywhere, I assured her, reaching for her hand. Not without telling you first. Anyway. The joke, small as it was, represented progress, our ability to reference the past without becoming mired in it. James raised his water glass in a toast. To new beginnings. And to Mom, who taught us both how to stand up for ourselves, even when it breaks your heart. To Mom, Samantha echoed, her eyes shining with tears. As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Not just for this moment of connection, but for the difficult journey that had led us here. My disappearance, that desperate, impulsive decision made in the depths of betrayal, had set in motion events I could never have predicted. In choosing to disappear, I'd been giving Richard what he'd asked for, but I'd also, unknowingly, been giving myself a gift. The chance to rediscover who I was apart from my role as mother and widow. To build a life on my own terms. To learn my own strength. Now, I was choosing to reappear not as the same person who had fled in hurt and anger, but as someone new, stronger, clearer about my boundaries, more confident in my worth. The next morning, as Samantha and I continued packing her apartment, she paused while wrapping a photo frame in bubble wrap. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret it, disappearing like that? I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her the honest answer she deserved. I regret the pain it caused you and James. I regret that I didn't find another way to communicate how deeply hurt I was. I folded a sweater, buying time to organize my thoughts. But I don't regret the journey it sent me on, or the person I've become because of it. Samantha nodded slowly. I think I understand that now. After everything with Richard, sometimes you have to walk away completely to see things clearly. Exactly. I smiled at my daughter, recognizing the wisdom she'd gained through her own difficult experiences. Sometimes, disappearing from a toxic situation is the greatest gift you can give yourself. As we worked side by side, preparing for her fresh start just as I was building mine, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Our family had been fractured, then forged anew through fire. We carried scars, certainly, but also a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. Richard had meant his words as a cruel dismissal. The greatest gift for our wedding is if you disappear from our family. He could never have imagined how that disappearance would ultimately strengthen the very bonds he'd tried to sever, or how it would lead each of us to discover resilience we never knew we possessed. In the end, perhaps that was the true gift, not my absence, but the transformations it had catalyzed in all of us. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you love to save yourself, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find the strength to make that difficult choice? Did you ever reconnect? And if so, how did the relationship change? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories of family, resilience, and healing. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the most beautiful beginnings.